Hey friends, back by request, we are going to check out more of this amazing show that's happening right now inside of the Disneyland Opera House, Evolution of a Dream. But today we're going to be looking at the details of Fantasyland. This board right here has Fantasyland concept artwork on both sides. We're going to break it down and also jump over to the historic site maps to kind of see where some of these ideas came from, and we all know where they ended up. So Brickey here doing some real nerd stuff that seemed to make some of my friends very happy. Let's jump into the concept artwork of Fantasyland. So where does the idea of Fantasyland come from? In 1951, there was this little island that would be a kind of miniature Fantasyland adjacent concept where you could see that there was going to be a Cinderella palace, but nothing that indicates it would actually be a full-on castle. Now, when we fast forward up 2 years to 1953, there is a Disney fantasy building and also a Wonderland gateway, but it leads over to what appears to be a circus and a pony farm. So nothing that's like Fantasyland other than something that looks like it could be somewhere in the vein of a storybook canal boats. In the first Anaheim site plan that was done in '53 by Marvin Davis, we see a hub, but it leads into a Fantasyland that doesn't necessarily have a castle. It's more of a fort type structure, but we do see the idea of a centralized carousel, attractions off to the sides, and then what would go on to become Captain Hook's Chicken of the Sea. So we're kind of getting there in our idea, but still very, very far off from reality. In September of 1953, things start to orient a little bit more familiar with our version of reality, and you do see the park leading up to a Fantasyland lobby, still not a castle, and we see a Fantasia illusion, and we see an Alice in Wonderland, a Peter Pan, and a Snow White. Notice Snow White's on the wrong side. Snow White, Peter Pan, and Alice in Wonderland are all rides, but Fantasia will be a walkthrough. But just days later, they keep massaging it, and they get a little bit closer. Now, instead of having the attractions stacked on top of each other, they're actually going to be elongated buildings with Snow White on the proper side and Peter Pan on the proper side. But Alice in Wonderland is sitting a little bit past where Toad's Hall is at today. Alice wouldn't make it on opening day, but she would show up, as we all know. This is the little map that appears in the bottom corner of the Lost Weekend illustration. We see our central hub, but our Fantasyland still isn't quite there. Snow White's on the right side. Pinocchio Square shows up. This is something that would never happen. And look, there's a fully exposed vista there where Peter Pan sits today. I broke down in the last video how you just keep massaging these ideas till you get the perfect blend. They were close, but it took time for reality to set in. And that's true with any creative project. There's always going to be real world restraints that make you make the ultimate decisions that you make, because those are based on reality. All of this is based on genuine optimism. That little crash course brings us over to this board. So over here, we'll have an idea of how these ideas are being massaged based on the journey it took to get to this point. Context is one of the most important things when you look back on historical creativity. Things where people are trying to make something that's part of our reality, but back then it was just all projection, ambition, and a whole lot of fingers crossed, let's hope this happens. And every creative knows that in the blue sky process, before you've been beaten down and shot down by management, real world constraints, and financials, this is where the heart just goes for it. So I can't wait to jump in and break this down and learn it for myself and share it with you. Thanks for showing up. So some of those early concept drawings showed us that they were seeing sort of a wall that would represent Fantasyland. Not necessarily a full-on castle, but a wall a sort of a decorative fence that would keep the Fantasyland area away from the other parks. Ultimately, they would settle on the icon of the castle, but a lot of these show that idea of how do we do a separational plane that will keep Fantasyland from leaking into the rest of the park. They were already thinking like people that build Hollywood sets. Showing the time period this is from, we can see a stairwell there, as well as a stairwell there. Stairs in today's theme park design are a big no-no. They had to fight like hell to put the stairs inside of Star Wars Galaxy's Edge. That was a really big deal that they pulled that off. But here's the keyhole that would take us into the world of fantasy. And you can also see this window right here that looks way more like a traditional carnival. Nobody knew what Disneyland was going to be yet. So they were definitely thinking about what do amusement parks look like, because nobody had quite made the America version of a theme park. And then we can see people on the second floor here. Maybe this is what they were envisioning for the Pinocchio Square. Or don't forget that Sleeping Beauty Castle was originally designed to be a wax museum. Thank God that didn't happen. In our next piece of concept artwork, we see Merlin's Magic Shop. And we see something that I feel like is a little bit more Spanish influenced. Could have that wrong, than the German-inspired area that we actually got. But I don't know, this even has like rough feelings of Batu with this little turret right here that's kind of missing its castle part. Notice on this one that the scale is much lower, not nearly as tall as the other one. And right in there, that looks like some inspiration for Tony Baxter's 1983 Fantasyland that obviously wasn't possible in the 1 year turnaround with the minimal budget that Walt had. Because in all actuality, Fantasyland would end up looking like this. So here's Snow White's attraction. And then over here, they left it kind of vague. This would end up becoming the movie theater, the Fantasyland Theater, the Mickey Mouse Club Theater that I made a video about. And look, there's this little walk-up stand right here where people would walk up to somebody and a cutout in the window. Those things didn't really materialize at Disneyland, but that's definitely the way that the industry saw the amusement business back in '53 when these would have been drawn. You can also see they have the castle wall running along the back facade here. Let's break this down real quick. Total ambition. Let's go nuts. Let's make it multiple levels. We have all the space. Let's go nuts. Okay, maybe we need to tone it down a little bit. Maybe it can't be as tall. Maybe we can't do stairs, but we can still make it look like a real castle. Okay, this is the budget that we have. Well, let's build the castle wall and then do a fair on the other side. This is literally how ideas go from ambition to realizing reality and then to what actually gets approved. This still happens today in every creative's career. And this is why people see this version of concept artwork and they get so bummed out when this version shows up. But that's just part of the creative process. Walt definitely loved the idea of a circus theme. And it's funny to think about a carousel that has animals on it, zoo animals, exotic animals, instead of the horses that we got. I do love that circus parade type on the top of there. And then we see a more Renaissance Ferris wheel. And it's interesting that they were illustrating what Ferris wheels could look like, because King Arthur, the Ferris wheel that would show up, was purchased in Toronto, Ontario, and came down and was refabricated for Walt's intention. King Arthur's Carousel is the oldest attraction in the park. All right, I got to do this around the announcements. But as I was saying, the King Arthur Carousel, oldest attraction at Disneyland, only attraction that predates Disneyland. There was an attraction elsewhere. So it's funny to see them designing a carousel, because all they'd really have to do is refurbish and re-theme one. So here is the famous first look of the castle that guests would see, future guests would see, printed in local newspapers. This was kind of the thing that they showed everybody. But even this has some different imperfections of the little ticket booth here, other little ticket booths going down the bridge. See, they're still thinking in terms of carnival, not theme park. And this little area right here, yeah, that never showed up. Nor did this, more almost Russian looking turret. So this has got some of the DNA, but again, it's not totally kissed with reality just yet, because not too far off from this is what would end up showing up. And then here's Kim Irvine's version of it that was done, I believe, in 2019, I want to say, where they really increased the colors. They worked on the contrast. She put the different patterns on the ceiling. And I think this has a lot to do with social media and how photographed the castle is, adding in contrast that would make it pop more and really make photos look even more magical, because at one time, I don't know if it's still true today, but this was the most tagged location on all of Instagram. And really, when we look at the advent of social media, it has created the golden renaissance of the theme parks. They were kind of in a bad spot in the 90s. In the 2000s, and the advent of the pocket computer in everybody's purse or front pocket drastically changed the future of the theme parks and also how we'd end up navigating them. We also see more case studies on trying to get the proper amount of Renaissance flair into Fantasyland. And I always love when you see the color swatches. If you wanted to do something fun, come in here and take a photo with this on your iPhone. Use those swatches to paint a room at home, and you'll have official Fantasyland colors. This appears to be a cropped version that goes beyond that map that we saw, where they're still thinking Alice is going to show up, but they've got Peter Pan and Snow White on the right side. And if you look, we're seeing the castle actually show up, as well as King Arthur's carousel. And we're also seeing that Pinocchio square, which they wanted to put right behind the carousel, which would have made the neighborhood of Fantasyland really interesting to have the facades both on the left and right, or east and west, and then also up to the north. And this balloon never would show up at Disneyland in California, but it did show up in Paris and at Disney Springs. You'll see ideas all the time that come from the opening days. They always go back to this well. Again, fun color swatches showing the breakdown of the designers figuring out what's the color palette for one of the carousel horses. And Walt went over King Arthur's carousel and made sure that every single horse would be a jumper, because he wanted every kid at Disneyland to have the exact same experience. And so since they made the entire carousel all horses and all jumpers, they removed the sleds and they used those as ride vehicles for Casey Jr. Fun fact. So now at this point, they know that they're going to be bringing in a carousel from Toronto, but they need to figure out how are they going to make that top match the other canopies in Fantasyland. So these are really interesting pieces of concept artwork that, because we know the history, we understand why they're doing these individual case studies. Here is the original version of Alice, where you see there was going to be a tea party vignette in the middle, and that the teacups would go around that vignette and you would basically lap around it. I would love to know what technology they were seeing, because the technology they use is basically a hidden Mickey underneath the ground, where there's 3 different circles that are all running intertwined with each other that create what we know Alice to be today. And I love this. I love looking over the top of the tree line there, kind of giving us a bird's eye view into this dad and his kid waiting for their turn to rip those teacups. And this guy right here, this is me. This is the guy who goes, yeah, no thank you, that's going to make me sick. I'm just going to watch you guys. Oh, do I love this piece right here. Just showing somebody working out the different colors, the different patterns, and seeing the overall design symmetry of all 9 teacups laid out together, so they can understand, does each one hold its own value? How does the set match? And are we creating a complete unity of storytelling for every guest that gets to jump in their own teacup? All right, friends, we've knocked out one side of the wall. If you're still here with me, you are really into some nerd stuff, but I'm having a great time and I'm excited that you're here. Side 2 is awaiting us. Let's jump back in. All right, so this appears to be a 1983 rendering of what new Fantasyland was going to be like. It's pretty accurate. You see a lot of the facade that we got for Peter Pan, but there is this little statue that Hook's hanging out next to. I don't quite think we ever got that. But you see the Matterhorn over there, indicating that we're well past 59. Not sure where I left off, but yeah, Captain Hook, being a hooker. And then we have another one of those studies for the early version of the front facades for Fantasyland. So we see the different color swatches, all the different shields, and it is so wild to think that we went from here to here. I mean, Tony Baxter, everybody gives him all the credit for Big Thunder, and why not? It's amazing. But New Fantasyland, as I've been studying it recently, unbelievable. Here we see some other early front facade studies for Peter Pan. This one being very, very wild. It almost looks like, late 80s, early 90s Disney. That's crazy. And this one right here, this shows them trying to put as much of that European flair as possible in, but also still keeping it within their obvious budget restrictions. All right, let's move over to some case studies for Chicken of the Sea. I might have called it Tuna of the Sea earlier. It's Chicken of the Sea. Let's look at some case studies for this and that beautiful skull rock. So this illustration is fantastic. This is the type that I want to just walk through. And it almost looks like there's a photograph underneath it, but I don't quite understand why that would be the case. But I love illustrations like this where you can see walking past, because it makes me want to make myself one of those little people and actually walk through every trail. You can see people here walking through where the jawline of the skull would go. But this one, this is my favorite piece on this whole board. I love the perspective of that we're actually up on the ship, seeing the old bridge that we can walk across, seeing the old school canopies, keeping people out of the sun, and that quilt over on the hillside of Casey Jr. and Storybook Canal boats. We can see the famous tunnels right there, some folks walking around, and we see all the different layers of water pouring off Skull Rock. And check that out. There's Monstro and the old ticket booth right there. Notice in this concept artwork, absolutely no indication of children, unless those are little ghost children. Are all the children dead? But I love this unusual perspective of this one. Fantastic. And then we have some site plan studies for 1983. Oh no, this goes beyond that. This is actually the Fantasyland extension that showed up before Galaxy's Edge over in the courtyard where it used to be the Plaza, Carnation Plaza. I'm doing this off the top of my head. Yeah, this is the Fantasyland. God, why can I not think of the name of this? I know you're yelling at me at home. Fantasy Fair. That's what it is. This is the Fantasy Fair area just right on the west side of Sleeping Beauty Castle. I got it. Here is a rendering of Dumbo with very generous tree line and then a back wall that would create that circus feeling with all those flags going across the top. But this is a more realistic version of the original Dumbo that would show up, where the elephants would actually be too heavy for the attraction to operate on opening day. Had a Had to retool that one, putting Dumbo on the list of kind of an opening day attraction, but not really. And here is the duck boat ride that never ended up happening. I believe this is a Bruce Bushman original. But I'm always curious how they envisioned that this was actually going to work. Like, and it's, you know, kind of not too far off from the flying saucers that would show up. Just a different idea, but having that windmill in there to create more of that European facade. And check this out. They're even separating the boats in a style similar to how they would separate the flying saucers. Now, this is a rendering of Plaza Gardens, which is what Fantasy Fair would end up replacing. And this is a way more romanticized version of Disneyland. Skews more Victorian. And I love this imaginary green field that we're looking over. There's the moat that goes around the castle. And this really kind of just paints it as a very elegant and upscale place. Definitely not an amusement park for kids, but a theme park for adults. I love this. And then our final piece is an even more romantic version of that. I am literally on my knees in this gallery. I probably look like a crazy person. This is a very romantic look of going into the Plaza Gardens. See couples on their date, the long shadows, and look at that. Glow of the moon with Big Thunder Mountain right on the other side of it. All framed in by the weeping willow tree. See, this is the perfect type of concept artwork where we have all these look away points. The light post, the tree, looking through the weeping willow, the couple in the foreground, the shadow that pushes everything back. Our main subject matter is right in here, but you have to look through a window of reality to get to what they're selling you. And then there's the fantasy in the background that just goes on into infinity. This is the model for the world's greatest concept artwork, and it gets done over and over again. This one just happens to be damn near perfect. All right, friends, we were able to look at all of the Fantasyland concept artwork piece by piece. And if you enjoyed this, comment below and let me know what land you'd like to see next, because I am loving this deep dive. And, you know, some of these we don't even really need.
And welcome to the Disneyland Opera House.
I keep getting cut off and losing my train of thought because I have to wait so long for all that to wrap up. But all I wanted to say is thank you for watching these type of videos. This is the type of stuff I love. Hopefully you do too. And by all means, let me know which land to do next. And if enough people are still into this, we'll knock out another one. Eventually, it's going to wear out its welcome. But for now, as long as people want to go on these adventures with me, I'll go. I think what I was going to talk about is a lot of these, we don't even really need to talk about the art style because it's so much about the conceptual evaluation of how they started here and how they got to what we all know today. So I love looking at the journey. And by the way, whoever curated this, you did a really great job of summarizing 70 years of magic into some really great pieces that have some great storylines that kind of tie them all together. All right, friends, thank you so much for showing up. I'm Brickey, and I love doing all this. I love doing it all with you. And guess what? Nobody came here to make me cry today. See you tomorrow.